Today I have on with me Tim Brand, and this is fun. One of my loyal podcast listeners that goes back to pretty much the beginning of the launch of my podcast, and who's also a client of mine, she recommended I connect with Tim and that he would be fabulous to be a guest on the show. And he is an author of a book that I read and loved, and I'm so thrilled to share with you. And what he does in the world is phenomenal. His book is phenomenal. And I am really excited to have this conversation so you can meet him too. And also highly recommend the book, which just now came out on Audible. All the links are going to be in the show notes. We'll be talking about it all. But Tim, welcome. And thanks so much for coming to talk with me today.
Oh yes, it's a pleasure to join you, your audience, and yeah, shout out to Val. She's an amazing connector of people and just such an encouraging person. So I'm excited to be sharing with you today.
Yes. So you are the founder and CEO of Many Hands. That is a nonprofit. And you established that in 2008. And you're the CEO. You provide the vision and the leadership for the US and international operations. And Many Hands impacts 25,000 people in 3 countries and reaches over 200,000 people per year through the Many Hands thrift stores that are in the US as retail stores. And so, I mean, it's just phenomenal, just already those stats and information. Before founding Many Hands, you also spent 10 years in the for profit world with experience in global strategies and global account management, IT, sales and management, and financial planning. And then something happened. And I already happened to know in your early 30s that switched you over into the nonprofit world. So I'm excited to talk about that. Well, and oh my gosh, we'll come back to the impact that Many Hands has had. So don't let me forget to bring up some of that information. But let's pause there for a second to have you tell us a little bit more about. And then there's the book. There's so many things.
I know
So
there's
many
just
things.
that's what's the issue. I jump on these podcasts. It's like there's so much good stuff to talk about,
There
but that's
is.
not a bad problem. At the end of the
No, it
day,
is.
is that's the whole thing. Is like we have such a unique opportunity with our lives to put our thumbprint on things, and I've just been incredibly blessed to be able to take some of the gifts and talents that I've had, the stories that have been woven into my life, and the unique experiences to then combine them into something that then has force.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I always talk about. Is we're trying to create we have a funnel and a pyramid strategy where in the places we serve that are on the lesser side of things, we try to build a pyramid where people then can stand and build something that's going to last the test of time. But on the U.S. side, and when I'm talking to most of my Western people, it's really how do we take this distracted life and all these things that we buy into, what's going to bring happiness and joy and all that kind of stuff. But how do we take that distracted life and work it down a funnel so at the bottom of it, it's this powerful force that's united, that is congruent, and that is all working in one direction. Because there's so much that can deviate us from our paths and so much that pulls us in these directions. And I think that's why people feel so burnt out at times because they feel like they have to be everything to everybody. And I'm
Yes.
just such a believer that there is, when you stop and you look backwards in your life, you will see unique paths, unique experiences, unique people that guide you to the place where you're at now with intention. And it doesn't mean you can completely steer it, but you can certainly guide within certain guide
Mm-hmm.
rails to get to places you want to go to.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yes. I mean, some of the points that I want to pull out is that, you're talking about choices, choices that have been made and being able to determine what you have control over and what you don't. And the earlier on in life that you really come to realize what that actually truly means, not the kind of
Yeah.
illusion and fantasy that we exist in a lot, and that many people exist in. And then start making some different choices for the things that you actually do have control over, then you can truly shape your life and make it one that is amazing and fulfilling. And for many of us, that it doesn't. For you listening, it's not that your life will be fulfilling when you've got a nonprofit and you're contributing to the, this huge volume of contribution being made clearly out in the world that Tim is. It no matter how quote, kind of measurable you may be looking at it from external standards, it's all about, really, it comes down to how you feel. And are you following that? Because if you follow that, then the world will benefit in many ways that you can't even imagine. I mean, I would imagine, Tim, that you never had, when you first even put your toe in the water for this change in your life and doing the nonprofit, did you really have a vision of where you would be today? I mean, was it, or was it
So
just, did it start
I
small?
am one of the crazy ones, that I actually had a pretty big vision from the
You did.
beginning. I called it a BHAG. I had how we could change the country of Haiti, which, if you know anything about Haiti, it's pretty tough. So I wrote a white paper in 2005, when I was, at that point, I was about 27 years old. After experiencing going on a trip when I was 18 in 1998, and these experiences that happened in my life, and that was spurred by two questions that were posed to me. Number one is, what's my holy discontent? What's the thing that just really irks me in the world? What's the thing that keeps me up at night, or gives me fuel, or gives me passion, that is uniquely to me? And then second thing is, what's in your hand to go and resolve this holy discontent? And for me, there's a couple of things in my story that I knew. Number one is, my dad went to Haiti when I was 7 years old in 1986. And I grew up looking at pictures of him serving people that looked very different than me, being wildly out of place, and hearing the incredible stories like, if it's yellow, let it mellow. If it's brown, flush it down. Those funny
Mm-hmm.
things that when you're 7, you're like, oh my gosh, that's an amazing story. And these incredible stories of him, like, giving birth to a lady while he's holding her leg in this hospital because they had no other workers. And it just fascinated me as a 7-year-old. But then I also had my mother, who was a professor in college, and she taught human rights and a lot of things around civic duty. And I grew up listening to the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King speeches, and hearing about Selma and Mississippi burning and just things like that. So there was always this thing inside of me. I haven't looked back. When I was 4 years old, I had an African American Cabbage Patch Kid, because that's what I requested. And so, like, for me, like, that was just part of my story, even though I was this
Mm-hmm.
Iowa kid in the middle of a landlocked country that we don't have a lot of people that look like that around us.
Mm-hmm.
But that was part of my unique story. And so when I turned 18, we went on this trip, and I led it. And so fast forward, then 6 years later, I'm in business, learning all these things. And the one thing that remained constant was this idea of how we could change this one country, this particular region. And so, taking my business principles, I started to put it into action for those that were lesser than, or the areas that don't traditionally get a lot of business planning, a lot of real strategic planning. Now, what I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt, I had the vision for where we ended up, but what I didn't always know was the path to get there. And there's a couple things that I will point out. Number one is, I didn't know the timing of it. Like, so 2000, when I was 2000, I went 98, 2000, went back. I made a covenant, and I'm a person of faith. So I made a covenant with God that said, I will in some way, shape, or form be involved in this country the rest of my life. And I wrote that on a piece of paper and actually burned it up to God when I was 20 years old. But I never understood what that meant until really 15 years later. And we had gone through some incredible hardships, some ups and downs, some crazy stories of losing everything and having to start over, and really these just wild swings within that. The second thing that I'll say that I never understood was how many, as a leader, I think leaders will get this, as a leader, of how many goodbyes I would have to have. And that'd be goodbyes from people that were either on my team that, for a season of life, they had to either leave, board members that were, again, on our team that had to transition off, people in the path that when we were small, they made sense, but as we got bigger, we had to transition or change personnel and people, donors that were really on board early, but as you get larger or as you change over the years, they have different passions that you had to be able to do that. and even leaders in country that were dear brothers and sisters that I've had to either let go of and bury, or that I've had to move a different direction than they did. And so that's one of those things where I can look back on my story and say, I never understood truly the highs and lows that it would take to end up where we are. I did understand the path, and I thought what we could do very naively, but you think, but the dream was there. But that pathway, the highs, the lows, the navigations, and the amount of, you're always excited when you get the newcomers, the new people, but really the people that also you have to say goodbye to in some way, shape, or form along the way.
Well, the path and the how, I think that is the whole point of this experience, that and this, being a human and having this life. And then also it's easy to get wrapped up in how. And the minute that I
Right.
think we do, well, that's when I end up starting to work with clients more too. They get a certain phase, and then there are certain changes coming in their life, or something that they were making a shift on, or external or internal. But they realize that the constant trying to figure out the how can drive them batty. And the more we can embrace the just going along, you can have your sight set on something, but then, releasing exactly what it's going to look like, exactly how you're going to get there. And does it even need to look like the thing that you're envisioning? So that really resonates. And you were talking about a lot of the saying goodbyes, and losses. And of course, one of them is your father, and
Yeah.
which your book is written about. It's called "Standing on the Shoulders: A Legacy Story of a Father, a Son, and Life's Greatest Gifts." And I want to get to that in a little bit here. It's a beautiful book about your father, and lessons, and so much. Um, but before we go there, I want to back up for a minute about, like, that shift in you, from that you told me was when you were 32 years old, right? When you shifted from for-profit
Yep.
world, being in financial planning and IT stuff and account management and strategies, and, business world in one way or another, for your earlier uh, adult years, and then shifting over at the age of 32. And you and I are close in age. We're about 4 years apart. So, we're looking back at a time. I feel like, of course, philanthropy, it's always been out there, but I feel like you hear about it. Well, and also the advent of the internet. When you and I were children, there
Right.
was no internet. So,
Right.
you only heard about what the handful of news stations would report. And that was what we knew about, period, end of story. So, I think that, there's more going on because more can be shared, right? And it's more, uh, people know about the possibilities more, and giving back and doing things of service and work of service is more common, or just there's more people doing it and we're hearing about it more. I don't know, compared to when we were children. So, but thinking back to 32, um, what, what is a key thing that you remember from that time, of that switch of, okay, I've got to change my life here. I don't want to be in the typical business world, but I'm going to take my business skills and go put them over here, and I'm going to do this switch. Like, what really resonates, or what do you think we would benefit from hearing about?
Yeah. So understand, when I was 32 years old and I made this switch, I was married. I had a 4 and a 2-year-old, and I went from a six-figure job, a high six-figure job, and I went to zero. Because when I went full time, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't doing this for money, and that I would be free from that bondage, because that's what holding me back. It was money. I was making decisions based upon my financial security, and I just knew, if I'm going to do this, I got to be all in. And this is the way that I needed to. So after much discussions with my wife, a lot of tears that were shed, it was time for me to go full all in. And but that story actually starts years earlier, and this is where I think some people think there's this moment where the rest of the world sees what's been happening, but there's so much below it. It's like the iceberg. Like they see the tip, but they don't understand all that was going on below that. And so there's these steps of faith where I jumped out. First, it started small, like, okay, well, I'm going to go on a trip to Haiti, and then I'm going to write a check for this much money, and then I'm going to attend this seminar, and then we did one of the coolest things when I was 20, well, this is 2004, so I was like 24, 25, something like that. We did a reverse offering at my church, and we were all given $25, and we were told to go impact the world. Like, go take the $25, go impact the world. And so myself, my wife, my mom, and my dad, we combined our money to take $100, and we sent letters out to all of our contacts that we knew, and we were both blessed with a lot of contacts, and said, can you match our $25, because we're going to build the first school that we built in Haiti. And through that generosity, we were able to raise something between $15,000 to $20,000 just off of letters. And for me, that showed me, man, if I just go all in on this with this $25, it can multiply way beyond my wildest dreams. And so that story was stuck into there. There was another one where I left another high paying job to pursue something that was more of a passion project. And it was paying still, but it was definitely a pay cut. And I thought at that point, man, there's no way in the world I'm ever going to make any money again. I'm leaving this high income job to go to a low income job. But again, through that story, not only did I make, but I actually ended up making more in a few years because I was really good at this particular role. And, so then I, again, had that built into my story. And so fast forward to 2011, and the thing that I'll say to anyone that asks me this question is I am wired, and I knew that my true self and to be the best version of myself is when I live a congruent life, and that there isn't discongruency. And what I was living at that point in my life was I was really good at putting on hats. So, and I would run around and put on hats. So this was my family hat, and this was my business hat. And then I'd go put on my mission hat, and then I'd go put on my spiritual hat, and then I would go put on my, provider hat, and like all these different hats. But I was also a different person in each one of those scenarios than who I was, just who I needed to be. And where it really got me is I went down to Haiti in 2011. We were going, and I was at that point president of the board, full-time, making money, white picket fence, 4 and 2-year-old, 3,000 square foot home, making good money, being mentored by the president of the company, and had plans for my life. But I went to go launch this school. Basically, we're launching a school and looking at buying ground for another school. And I sat with my Haitian leaders, and they were just praising me over the top and all these things that, could make a big head. But I just felt awful, because I was like, if they really knew my life, if they knew how much I was really dedicating towards this, they would not be saying these praises. And I just felt like such a fraud. And I came home and I just couldn't shake that feeling. And I'm an audio listener and I'm an audio processor. So I jump in my car, I start driving around, and I pop in this CD. At that time we had CDs. There was these little dish you put in a player and it played. It was amazing. And it was the founder of International Justice Mission, Gary Haugen. And these guys deal with the world's worst. They persecute sex crimes, they persecute child traffickers, like really dark, ugly stuff for the world. And he was telling this story about when he was a young boy, that him and his father and his brothers, they would go to Mount Rainier. And in Mount Rainier, there's the Welcome Center, and it had all the stuffed animals, and it had the DNR person talking to you about what's going to be on the island, what's going to be on the mountain, and all the things, the little meadow in the background that you go look at. But then there was a path out of that led to base camp, where the people that actually ascended the mountain, they would go. And it had all those signs on there, caution, falling rocks, go at your own risk, all that stuff. And his brothers wanted to go and his dad wanted to go, but Gary convinced his dad to let him stay. And so he stayed in the Welcome Center. And he says at first he was really proud of himself because he's in this Welcome Center. And, he got to hear the story from the DNR guy. He saw the stuffed animals. He learned about the erosion on the island or on the mountain and all those sort of things. But then by hour 2 and hour 3, he realized that video is just on repeat. And that DNR guy says the same joke every time. And that stuffed animal is just dead. And then about 4 or 5 hours later, his brothers came back and they were flush in the face and they were tired and they were sweaty and they had scraped knees, and one of them fell down, had like a scraped elbow, but they had experienced their mountain with their father. And he says, I went to the mountain, but I didn't actually live the life to go experience that mountain. And I knew at that moment, I never wanted to look back at my life and say, I was brought to the mountain. I had the vision for what could be possible. I had the gifts and talents in my story. I had the connections to make this actually happen. But I chose to live the safe life in the Welcome Center. And if I do that, it's a shadow of what the mission is. It's a harder mission. It's a harder journey. It's a harder everything. But ultimately, I've got to go all in and go pursue this. And the cool thing is, see, my wife had gone with me to Haiti in 2000. The first time we met each other, I told her, like, this is going to be a lifelong passion of mine. And she went with me before we were ever married. And so this was built into our story from the beginning. So again, and I look back in the 10 years before I made the leap, like that had already been put in place. There are building blocks that are already put in place.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I made the leap, it was scary. It was, no doubt it was scary. And I look back now, I'm like, what was I thinking? I had a 4 and a 2-year-old. I had mortgage payments. I had car payments. I had all those things. But I knew that if I commit fully with myself and I live all in, that my resonance inside of me was going to be true, and that I'd become the best version of who I'm supposed to be. And no matter what, that I would take this experience and I would learn from it. And by the grace of God, then now you look back and you see all the people's lives that have changed, and all this because of the obedient yes that I had. And if I'm available to people, showing up with my true self, being uniquely who I am to be, no matter where I'm at, that more will happen than I ever imagined. But I had to let go of it myself. I had to surrender that and just say, I'm good with just being obedient and not controlling the outcomes on that. And so it was a really challenging time, but at the same point, man, it was a rocket ship too at the same point. So much. And that's where I look back on all these jobs that I had for 10 years. And I spent 10 years in for-profit. And I am so thankful that I spent 10 years in for-profit, because I learned from amazing leaders. I learned how to run a business. I learned how to develop a website. I learned how to do my finances. And so it finally made sense when I went full time, because I was an employee of one. And I was like, hey, I know how to build a website because I did that. I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. I could do that. I worked for a global company. I could make big time strategy. I have all these contacts around the world that I made through my job. And now I can go call upon them to be part of this organization. I can do financial accounting because I did that. And I was like, oh, this 10 years have been prepping me for this. This is what I've been prepped for. And so I knew this is what I was supposed to do. There was no shadow of a doubt inside of me when it finally got to it. But I had to get out of the way of myself to say, what's holding me back? And is that really true? And is that just?
Yeah. A few things that I caught myself taking a few notes on is you brought up choice again, which I think is just really, really key, and not controlling the outcome. And, that is also huge, so a couple themes running through today for sure about control and choice and getting out of your own way. Because there's so much of us that can just grasp for that control to have things be some certain way and not feel like we have control, and can get in our way of creating amazing things in our lives, including a super fulfilling, super amazing life that, whatever that means to anybody, and having each person be able to find their own way in that. Like you were clear from an early age that trickles back. Like you can look back and connect the dots for where you're at now, but that connects back to your parents deciding to go to Haiti for the very first time, and, whatever drove that decision. I mean, like, if anybody influenced them before that, all these things that go back, and the influences. But those, I just noticing, choice and control. I think a lot of people struggle with, eh, with trying to control things they can't, and getting stuck in moments where they forget that they have choices. So I just
Yep.
wanted to really call attention to those concepts.
Yeah. The other thing that I would say, Charis, that I think really helped me at a young age, um, was I did a lot of work around my unique individual purpose. What's my unique purpose? What's my identity in that? Why? What makes me tick? And then really nailing down my value system. Like, what do I value? What am I clinging to? So getting to know thyself at an early age
Mm-hmm.
really helped me understand then what's going to put me in those positions and to be as successful as I can be. Because I think at first you think, the world's your oyster. You can do everything, which in theory sounds like a good, cool, groovy thing, but like end of the day, that's not true. Because you're uniquely wired in certain things, and I'm uniquely wired in certain ways that this made sense to me, and it makes no sense to others. So number one, we can't try to mimic someone else's path. You have to be able to understand your path. And part of that is to understand who you are and how
Yep.
you are uniquely created, what your unique experience is, and what your unique connections as well. Like we are all given the gift of connections where there's people in our lives that can be bridges to places we want to go to if we understand how that can function and how that can work. And I say a bridge because a bridge is a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
I go to help them, but they also come and I'm a bridge. They're a bridge into me as well. It's not I'm using them to go someplace. No, it's a bridge between the two of us.
Mm.
And so that was really critical. And I did that when I was like 27, 28. A pretty deep
Oh,
dive into all that. And
that's
which then
awesome.
when I finally made this leap, like there was all these pieces already in place that I could have firm footing on to say, I know enough. I don't know everything, but I know enough that it needs to be my yes.
Mm. Well, and when you talk about values, values can change over time and at different stages of our lives, but to be able to have the awareness and desire and willingness to look at that at a younger age in your 20s is huge, because then I'm sure you've revisited it over time too, and checked in and thought about, is this still in alignment with values? Have any of the values changed? I mean, that's one of the things I do with my clients, people I work with, is looking at their life. And you mentioned congruency. Well, you know alignment, and I consider body, mind, heart, and spirit alignment. And when those aren't in aligned and connected with values, that's when we feel wonky. That's when,
Yep.
health stuff keeps coming up. That's where I think a lot of our challenges come into place, because we forget we do have control over certain things. We try to control things we don't have control over. And then we forget that we have choice, and we aren't paying attention to the fact that we're out of alignment with something's out of whack with our own unique self, because me being in alignment in those ways is going to be different than you. And that's also what I'm helping with my work, is helping people look under the hood and see how they
Yeah.
operate. Because how you operate, Tim, is different than me, is different than the client I had a call with just before we jumped on. And, understanding what triggers each of us to get in our own heads, to get in our own way, to try to control where we actually it's an illusion, all that stuff. It's very unique to us. I mean, underneath it all, it's all similar. It's all this sense of, and a fear of being unworthy, and there's a certain commonality. And yet how we identify with that and how we can change it and be aware of it is unique. And how we
Yep.
can utilize, like you said, our unique skills and our personalities. And once you can do that more, I mean, and then make some shifts like you did, and me too, becoming a coach. And then I look back, and then my clientele's evolved over time too. And my husband, the little kids on the singing shows and things, when they're like, 5 years old, and they're like, I've been training for this my whole life.
Yeah.
They're
Uh-huh.
adorable.
Yep.
And you're like, yeah, all 5 or 6 years. Whoa. And
Yep.
it's just adorable to hear. But we have this joke now going on with us, when we talk about some things, and I connect the dots backward in my life. And I'm like, oh, no wonder this is the clientele I'm really connecting the most with. No wonder it's shifted to this and over time. And then he jokingly says, you've been training for this your whole life. But so
Exactly. Yeah.
but I do have, 40 whatever, almost 49 years that I can put to that and connect those things backward. But the more I have leaned into my uniqueness and my skills, and stopped trying to fight through the things that I was okay at or even good at, but didn't enjoy, you
Yeah.
know, huge changes. And then I've been able to make a bigger impact too,
Yep.
right? In my own way.
Yep.
I found my own lane. Mine happens to be more one-on-one, but then I'm working with people who are doing amazing things out in the world, and I'm trusting the ripple effect, right? And so, so no matter what it looks like for everyone, the more you can find your unique path to utilize your unique skills on what actually to live the most fulfilling. I'm just it's a game changer. So I love all of that. Now, what you've been able to do with many hands, a few example. Tell us a little bit about some of the things. I know that the donations, what you've been able to produce through many hands and give to the world. So give us a little bit some of those facts, because it's really quite phenomenal, and I'm not going to do it justice with my couple notes I've got here. So I'd love to hear you share.
Yeah, no problem. So we call it three divisions, how we achieve our strategy. We ignite generosity through our generosity engines, which is our four social good thrift stores. And these are like 25,000 square foot stores. These are not small little dinky things in a strip mall. We take over Kmart's, we take over Bed Bath and Beyond's type of things, and then we make them all for generosity. We've run 31,000, last year we had 31,000 hours of volunteer time given towards that people would come in and volunteer their time. We did just over 2 million items that we repurposed in the world to go do social good, and raising almost $5 million in the meantime, just last year alone, to then go out and bless the global world. And then the thing I love about that is that also creates a higher quality product in our backyard for people that have needs. It allows us to give excess and abundantly to homeless shelters, people in need, crisis situations. We in turn also give a lot of vouchers to people in need through systems that are established, such as crisis centers, churches, but they come and shop in a store like everybody else with dignity, as opposed to going to a free clothing closet, which is really cool.
Oh.
We ignite generosity, we grow community, and that's our work that we're doing in Haiti, and then we opened in 2023 in the Bahamas. We go an inch wide, mile deep, and so within a family, we try to do 6 main programs with every family we work with. So that's education, leadership development, agriculture, help them grow their own food, safe homes, and medical assistance, and economic development. So every family we work with, we first take care of the women the first 1,000 days of life. So when they're pregnant with a child in the womb, we want to try to get them in our programs. We then feed, we do education programs, we do maternal programs for them. Then they feed into what's called the Power to the Parents program, which is helping the parent be able to take care of their own children. We also then put a cement floor in their home. We rebuild their home, put a latrine, things like that. Then ultimately creating jobs for them. So we have a jewelry company that we partner with. We've got agricultural work that we partner with. And then we work with a lot of schools, because the food that we grow, then we want to use in our schools. So we feed 19 schools, 3,000 kids a day through those programs. We have about 500 families in our first 1,000 days program. And we've married over 200 families. Pretty incredible to see that. And then we also look at the marginalized in our world. So that's particularly working with those that are most vulnerable. So usually lower limb disabilities. And we've been able to give what's called a PET cart, personal energy transportation cart, to 560 individuals. What's really cool is then they got their mobility back. So they can walk now by powering with their hands, their little carts, and they then go and they plant gardens in our raised garden beds. They formed little associations where they go deliver things to different people. And it's just really cool to walk through that. And then one last thing I want to put on that side of stuff is then we work with public schools in particular. So like in the Bahamas, we've got 600 kids right now that we're working with in a public school program to build libraries and to give reading and math skills for kids that are behind grade level. So most of the kids that we work with are between 2 to 3 grades behind, grade levels behind where they should be. And so we do intervention strategies with teachers that are trained, classroom sizes that are 1 to 5 teacher ratio, to really give the individual size so they can go from 0, which most of our kids are testing at a 0, reading and writing and math skills, to somewhere around 85% back to grade level, which is pretty cool. And then lastly is we invite people on the impact journey. And that's what we're talking about here is, people that go experience God's love in action through community. We all transform together. I am just as broken as the people I serve in places like Haiti and the Bahamas. It's just my brokenness looks different than their brokenness.
Mhm.
But I have strengths to give. I'm not going to minimize myself. I have strengths to give, and they have strengths to give me as well. And the cool thing is when we really come together and we collide with the global world, we start to see that they have the same brokenness and the same strengths and the same weaknesses, but yet we together form a bigger whole. And so we just try to get people to introduce the story. Our goal is to share 10,000 stories of people across the world that are doing incredible things every day. And then to help them commit to being love and action in their world. So that's what we do on the impact journey. So we have curriculum that we've written. There's books like the one I wrote about my father, and that's an impact story. We have events that we put on, bring in inspirational speakers, people like myself, but others as well that come. John Gordon's come to that. Tommy Spalding's come to that. John O'Leary's come to that. And we just inspire people to go be love and action in their communities. And so through that, we generously grow impact. We want to ignite generosity, we want to grow community, and we want to invite people on the impact journey.
Beautiful. All of this, I can't help but think of your father because I think he, from what you've shared in your book, is the one who made an impact upon you and instilled all the seeds for
Yep.
all of this. Am I saying, is that fair to
Yeah.
say?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So let's talk a bit about the book because it's a beautiful book. It's called Standing on the Shoulders: A Legacy Story of a Father, a Son, and Life's Greatest Gifts. Shot up to be a #1 bestseller on Amazon. It was a top 100 book. And I wrote this in a few years ago, and then you, as I know, sat on it for about a year. You did it really just out of your own personal healing journey and need to do it, and then you decided that it was something you did want to share with the world. I think that is even just it's really powerful to know that now after reading it, to realize, wow, you wrote this to help yourself and to process, and then later decided, okay, do I want to share this? How does my family feel about this being shared? All the things that you went through. So,
Yeah.
so like I said, absolutely beautiful book. Um, it it obviously it addresses a lot of, as you say in the tagline, a legacy story. So let's well let me back up. Let's talk about the question that inspired the book. So share that
Yeah.
with us.
So the question that inspired the book and the question that I was ultimately wrestling with as I thought, particularly in my kids and what my dad had done is, is the way that I'm living my life right now, are there going to be people that are going to have to fix everything that I broke during my life? Or are they going to stand upon my shoulders, stand firmer, see farther, love deeper because of the way that I lived? And I really thought about that gift that my dad gave me. He wasn't a world figure. He didn't make the national news. He didn't, he wasn't one of the LinkedIn superstars or anything like that. I mean, ultimately, he had a nice life. But at the same point, he absolutely gave me the platform and the foundation that I could thrive and I could flourish. And I've run into so many people that have spent their lifetime trying to fix things either their parents broke, things that their friends broke, things that they broke and then had to come refix. And unfortunately, that brokenness gets passed on. And so, one thing that when I share this in like a keynote or something like that, is I always tell people is, every story is a little different. And if you come from a place where there is a lot of brokenness, there's a lot of hurt, is, some of you have been given a big old box full of poo that have been stamped guarantee on it, and that's what you've been given. And the question is, are you going to take that box and are you going to pass it to the next generation and say, well, this is what I was given, so that's what you get? Or are you going to dig a hole and are you going to bury that and create it as fertilizer to grow a new tree?
Mm,
Because ultimately, those pains and those hurts are the best fertilizer for change if we process through it, not run
mm-hmm,
away from it,
mm-hmm.
not go around it, not
And
avoid it, but we have to walk through it.
not just bury it for the sake of burying it because we don't want to face it.
Correct.
Process it
Correct.
such that it's actually
Yep.
utilized, and
Correct.
then through that it's given back to the earth, back to back to
Correct.
source. Yeah.
And so, I was lucky enough that my father gave me this. And so then how am I stewarding that gift and being able to pass it on to the generations to come and the people that I influenced during my time? And so that's really that what this book is about is sharing a story. And I'm in my mid 40s, and I've heard from you, a lot of your listeners in that same point.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing the world did not prepare me from was saying goodbye to my mom and dad.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't think about what that means, whether that means they're physically gone right now, or you start to see where they're deteriorating. They are
And
not the
let the
people
listener
that you.
know, I want them to know, how old were you when your father passed?
So I was 42, 41, 42.
Okay. I was 38 when my mother passed. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so and I'm just 4 years older than you. So, yeah, I agree. These not much preparation for our generation, not as much as I think there is available now.
Well, nobody wants to talk about it. And I
Right.
understand because it's not a fun subject to talk about. And even if your parents aren't necessarily gone, to see the deterioration, there's a massive difference between a 70-year-old and your 80-year-old mom and dad. And then when they go, if you have the benefit where they go beyond that, it just is tough. And so that's where this whole time, like this time period where it's like the world kind of hits you from all angles. Like you basically, your dreams that you had as when you were little, you're like, am I really living these dreams that I thought when I was 20 years
Mm-hmm.
old what I could do? And then your kids get to be an age, if you have kids where they're like the middle schooler, high schoolers, or they don't really give the love and affection anymore either. And then your parents are like kind of fading away or they're gone, and you're like, man, what is going on? And that's where, like,
Mm-hmm.
before the storm hits is when you got to do the hard work, because if you're not prepped for that, it can throw you off big time.
Oh yeah.
And all of a sudden you're looking around and you're like, what just happened? And you get off kilter. And so again, I just, my hope in reading this is that number one is it allows people to see what a good story looks like. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't want to necessarily publish it. Was I was like, well, I know there's a lot of people that don't have the same story, and I don't want to make someone feel bad because that wasn't their story. But then the more I got counseled on it, they're like, the world needs to see a good story. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
like, don't be afraid to share your story for who you uniquely are and generally from you where you're at. And then secondly is that if it can help other people prep or process in their own story, because I know from everyone I've talked to, they you can't help but start to think through your own story when you read this,
Oh.
and in processing things through yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
so I know it brings out a lot of emotions, the large swing. And I think that's a good thing, because ultimately we need to feel. We are called to feel. And so much of us in this world right now wants to make us numb. And let's just over medicate, sit on a Netflix, don't feel, just keep going so you don't have to feel anything. But at the end of the day, it is in the feelings that deep reservoirs get built into our soul, where yes, there's pain or there's suffering or there's different things, but ultimately when joy comes, there's a reservoir to hold that joy that then we can retain for so much longer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I've learned through this whole process.
Well, for me, um, and well, and people listening and people who I work with, they're at a time when they're realizing that it is time to face some of the feelings that they have developed, often unconscious ways to avoid. And I mean, I did that myself. And reading your story about your family and your father and his life experience, and then his end of life experience, because you go into great detail with key pivotal points for your whole life that give us a beautiful picture of him. For me, and with my losing, well, I don't like to say lost. I'm still catching myself with that common phrasing,
Yeah.
because I don't, it's like I don't feel like I've completely quote unquote lost her. But having my mom pass away, at least from physical form, 10, almost, it'll be 11 years this November. And then having my dad, that'll be 30 years this summer, 30 years ago with the hot air balloon accident, and having him face a complete change of life, mobility,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing his body and the challenges that brought about then and over the 30 years, and him turning 80 this summer, still with us. Um, and I've had thoughts. There's been times in my life where I've started to write a book. I actually did a beautiful interview with him, but it's like 4 hour plus hours long. I need to come up with a shorter version to share with all of you listeners. So I did interview him actually Christmas time, and it's just something that I need to put together to share
Yeah.
pieces as like as I'm sure you can think about to relate to too when you were doing the book. It's like picking out pivotal things because that's going to be so I want to go through and pick out the pivotal things to share with you all, but that's going to be my version of of something for now. And but I did resonate with so many of the beautiful things that you shared about what you learned from your family, because I've learned so much, and was I had a beautiful childhood, and then I got to see some of those physical, when you talk about some of the emotional struggle your father went through toward his end of life, and dealing with cancer, and the challenges that he faced with his body. um, I could relate to some of those with watching my mom struggle with her liver failing, and then my father over the 30 years with the challenges that being uh, paralyzed brings to a
Mhm.
body. And so I really related a lot. So much of it resonated with me. It's beautifully written. And I love how you would weave in the backstories into the present, because there's a whole theme of a story you're telling about his end of
Right.
life. And through that, though, you weave in the what I'll refer to, I guess, as flashback moments to bring in to share with us. And you tell these beautiful little snippets that are just little nuggets to help paint a picture. And it was very moving. And like I said, I really could relate to a lot of it myself. Um, like, and a man like I can relate to too, of just wanting to do good for people, take care of others, and just having that modeled for us. I mean, I think it really it's super powerful what that can instill, and what you and I were fortunate to have as children with that kind of a father figure. And also the way that you presented your mother too. So thank you, and I just want to really acknowledge how beautiful you it is, and everything that you've shared inside of it, and the way you did it, and how much I could personally resonate. Um, so it does talk about legacy that your father left behind through you. So obviously that's being carried forward in your own life. But um, what do you think is the greatest lesson that you want people to have uh, around how they view their legacy?
Uh, I think one of the key things for my dad, and the thing that I learned the most, was choose generosity
Mm,
and be generous with your grace, be generous with your forgiveness, be generous with your time, be generous with your financial resources. Generosity is never going to steer you wrong. And I know, like, that's anti what maybe the world says right now. The world says, think of yourself, make sure you take care of yourself before you're generous to anybody. But I hope that between my life of making the jump that I made when I was 32, and again, looking at it and saying, how can I shovel these resources, this time into other people, was really learned from my dad, and how he navigated his life. And even at the end, again, he was one of those rare few that he's in the infusion center getting cared for, but yet he's walking with nurses and trying to cope them of like, well, this is okay, like we're okay, like type of thing. And so I think the legacy that my dad would say is that he was very generous, and he saw the people in the world that nobody else saw.
hmm
um, and he had a way to be able to share goodness that wasn't overbearing, that wasn't grandiose or grandstanding, and to share tough love at times too, where it was like very much like, I am telling you exactly what I feel right now. But at the end of the day, as you walk away, you're thankful that he was shared that with you. And so he had that generous gift to share with the world. And so I think that's one thing that I challenge all the listeners here to think about is, how am I living a generous life? How am I thinking of abundance mindset instead of a scarcity mindset? How ultimately is what I'm doing going to live beyond me? That whatever I do now is just seeds that I'm planting in the ground that maybe I get to see flourish, but I also might not get to see flourish, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
okay with, because it's going to be a beautiful panorama for the world to enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Great. I want everybody to take that to heart. What is one of the most surprising lessons that you learned in your dad's final weeks? Because I know that challenging time. I know it was for me with my mom too. So, is there something that stands out when you think back? Something that was maybe something you didn't quite expect, or that people
I
may,
think
or people may find it unexpected or counterintuitive. Maybe it didn't surprise you necessarily, but.
um, to me, one of the things that probably hit me the most, and I wasn't in this, so I wasn't prepared for it, was the weight and how quickly that weight shifted to my shoulders to be the
Mm,
primary caregiver for, like, even mom as she was grieving, within our family. Like, my dad was the patriarch. He was the one, and then that did shift very quickly, where all of a sudden I'm the one organizing things and making decisions and doing stuff. And that was something I wasn't completely prepared for. And the other thing that I'll say in that is, I was fully prepared to grieve my dad well and to love my mom well. But what I didn't understand was I was also going to have to be dad to my kids who are grieving grandpa being gone,
mm,
and to others in the community that also were grieving. And for them, I had to be stronger. And so, like, it was just a weird heaviness for me that I didn't quite understand that would be there. Is, I would go and have an incredible moment with my dad, and, like, but then I turn around, and my kids are grieving, and I have to be their shoulders that they have to stand on. It doesn't mean they can't see dad be vulnerable, or dad
yeah.
cry or that kind of stuff. That's not what I'm saying. But they can't see dad completely fall apart. Because end of the day is, I have a responsibility to care for them. And remember, they are grieving as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the only one grieving in this situation. There are others that are grieving as well. And we're all going to grieve a little bit differently. And it's okay to grieve. It's okay to grieve in your own time. It's okay to grieve in your own way. But then create the systems, or the atmosphere, the culture that allows for people to do that in their own way, that you can be a support and not a tear down in
You
that.
did that beautifully with your family because you describe it in the book, multiple instances of doing that for your family, your not and community. I mean, so it was your mom and sibling, and then also your children
Nephews,
and
nieces. Yep.
yes, the whole extended family, and then the community at large. But you did that amazing to create the space and offer them the opportunities to go through whatever emotions they needed to, make sure they got, the time that they needed to or wanted. And you just didn't miss a beat with taking, I mean, it was just phenomenal to hear how you handled all of that. I mean, it's an amazing model for many people, I think, to learn from. If they grabbed how you did that, that would be one of the amazing nuggets they could pull if they could then do that for their own families when if and when that time comes for them.
Yeah.
So that's something that just really jumps out at me when you share that. I really remember that from the book.
Yeah. And I want to say, the last thing I'll say on that is, there was a decision. Again, choices. I think maybe one of the things you'll hear from me a lot is, there's choices. I made a choice to say, I'm going to be the one to help my dad finish well. Like, that was a
Mm-hmm.
clear, conscious choice. And going back to being gracious and generous, whether or not your parents deserve it should not be the question. The question should be, is what I'm giving, can I put my head on the pillow at night and say, I was the one that was generous and gracious, and I went above and beyond for them, whether they deserved it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that people can read that and see that and be like, you know what, that's some things that I need to commit to doing, um, in different situations. And it doesn't mean you bend over backwards. Doesn't mean you're a willow that gets, just bent. At the end of the day, is like, you're resolute on what is just and what is right. And you're saying, I'm going to be the one to go above and beyond in this situation and be gracious.
And especially if you have the capacity to do so, which you did.
Yep.
You were
Yep.
able to, I mean, like I'm mainly referring to literally emotional,
Hmm.
internal capacity to navigate what you did and take um to take on that role that you chose to. So
Well, back to
so
your earlier comment
mhm.
of when you said, you're 49 years old and you were made for this,
Oh yeah.
and you were 5 years old and you were made for this. I have spent the last 16 years now in my life in a country that's incredibly difficult, incredibly difficult. I have faced enormous giants. And that's one thing that I can say is I've been uniquely created for such a time as this.
Mhm.
And I know that. And so that's where the responsibility for me to be human and that I'm going to be a son that grieves his father and, you know, all that comes with that. But at the same point, I was also uniquely made to also create that space for others to experience something that they maybe wouldn't have on their own and that my dad couldn't do on his own without some help and assistance.
Yeah. So what do you think what do you think your dad would say right now if he could chime in? If he could chime in and say something to you personally right
Okay.
now, what do you think he would say?
Well, I know this because it was the very last words my dad ever said to me. Is he said he pulled me in. I didn't know he was going to die. He didn't know he was going to die. We didn't think it was going to come that quick. The next morning's when he died, but he said, "Tim, you have loved me so well,"
Oh,
and that was
mhm.
his last words to me. And so I know that's what he would say. I know if he came down and he'd be like, "You have loved and honored me so well, above and beyond anything I ever imagined." Um, so yeah, I know that.
Oh. So, what do you hope our listeners will take away from today? And especially if they go get your book and, uh, and especially when they are facing similar challenges than that you talk about in the book and the passing of a parent.
Yeah, I think number one is we can't outrun death. Death is like if the end of the day is like we're trying to avoid dying, we're in a losing battle. So the question is what are we going to do with the now? How do we be where our feet are planted now? How do we start to build paths or create pathways that are going to take us to become the best versions of ourselves now and allow others to on that journey at the same time? And so I hope if they pick up the book, number one is they get to see a beautiful story. That's something that I couldn't have crafted on my own. There's a bigger power at play here that helped craft some of that story, and they can see the goodness of what it looks like when it goes well. Because I want people to experience the love and goodness of a great father who loves their kids and who finished well. So number one, I hope from that. Number two, though, is if you're listening to this and just in your greater journey, is we are all capable of more than we imagine. We put limits and finite limits upon ourselves of what's possible. At the same point, though, we have to be true to who we are. Things aren't possible because I'm not going to live the same life as you are. So that's my life isn't possible to be your life, but yet there's uniqueness inside of me that is called to be great in my own way. And I think that's out there for everybody. And I think everyone has that opportunity, but you have to do a little bit of, I call it, there's four phases of that. Number one, you have to reflect back on where you've been, where you're at. You have to expect then, like, what's my future? What do I want? And where do I want to go? Then you have to connect to the here and now. Where am I at in that journey? And am I coming more like that? Am I moving away from that? But like, where am I at that connection point? And then you have to commit to whatever it is that you want to go to. But those all play a role. It's not just about the future. You can't just say, "Well, I'm going to be this future person." Like in the day, that comes from a place where you're at. You can't just always look at the past either. It's not just like, "Well, I'm only looking backwards." That's not good either. And you also just can't live in the here and now. So all three of those are needed to say, like, okay, where did I come from? Where am I going? Where am I at now? And what am I committing to move forward? And if
Mm-hmm.
you can do that, you do that well over an extended period of time, the world the world is needing you and your unique voice and your unique story to show up, and it will. But you just got to stay true to that path.
Mm. Yes. Love it. If people, so we're going to have links in the show notes to the book, to your website for Many Hands, the thrift stores too, all the things. So, and you on LinkedIn as well. I've got a note here. But if obviously you're a nonprofit doing great work in the world and wanting to do more great work. So, what are you looking for? What do you need? What can we have our ears and eyes open for people that would be helpful for you? Opportunities. So, go ahead. Tell us. Requests you have.
Yeah,
What could help you, and who can help you, and what do you need right now?
for sure. So, number one is we are a Guide Star Platinum, 5 star, 4 star, whatever the highest star charity with Charity Navigator. We believe strongly in transparency. So I know that's one of the things when you're talking about nonprofits is, well, what's your transparency model? Part of the reasons why we built the thrift stores is because I cover our own admin and overhead by our own businesses. So that way, when
Mm.
money is given, it can all go to the places it needs to go to. So people can have assurance like our money's actually going someplace. Right now, the current needs are there's actually a couple. Number one is so we have a school down in Haiti. We started at preschool. We're through sixth grade. We need to add a 7, 8, 9 wing to that building. So that's about a $200,000 project. Our schools are above and beyond. They're fully electrical. They run off for solar. They have pressurized water in them. We have 2 teachers in the classroom. Our kids get through 2 meals a day. So these aren't your Haitian classrooms. These are high end because they deserve just the same as we deserve to have an education that's truly going to change their life. So number one, there's that if you're like educationally drawn. Second project that we have is our work in the Bahamas, in regards to rebuilding homes. 2019, the largest hurricane made landfall in Abaco, Bahamas, called Hurricane Dorian. Google it, look at the videos. It will absolutely startle you. 52 hours of 180 plus mile per hour winds completely destroyed the island, and the 40,000 occupants it had on the time. The problem was is when the normal traditional rebuild happens, what happened in March of 2020? COVID-19
Mm.
hit. So the pandemic happened. No one came back to rebuild the island. After the pandemic stopped, everyone forgot about it. So there's all these homes right now that are half built, maybe
Oops.
roofs are on them, but the interior is not built. And so we're going to go and try to rebuild over probably 100 homes in the next 3 years. And so if you want to be part of rebuilding homes, we've got actually a large group of volunteers that are going to come down and do it. I just need to buy the materials. So I need to buy, drywall, electrical, plumbing, all that kind of stuff. And so it costs money to go do that. But then we've got volunteers already raising their hand to say, we'll go back and rebuild those homes. So those would be 2 right off the bat that I would say for sure. If you're interested in a certain project, those are 2 projects that are both humanitarian in nature, but also will change the world because who doesn't need a home? Who doesn't need kids to be educated? If you're just looking to give in general, there's a lot of ways that you can give. There's our first 1,000 days program, which help women and children in pregnancy in the first 1,000 days of life, both the mother and the child, supporting them. Love to see more people sponsor that program. That is a like $40 a month type of sponsorship, which then you get pictures of kids. You're able to learn their stories. We try to get you again very much so you get connected with what's happening on the ground. Lastly, as I would say, is if you're interested in actually serving. So Many Hands Impact is where we go serve. We send right now around 400 to 500 people a year down to Abaco to help rebuild those homes I'm talking about, to go in the school systems, to grow food and all those sort of things. But we're really highly relational and we're big on stories. So part of it is unpacking your own unique story while you're serving others, and you're receiving the gifts of story from the people you're serving so that you can learn nuggets of truth from them to apply in your own story. Because most of us, when we go serve, we're not going to serve there for a long period of time, but we want to take things we've learned there and to come back home to be better mothers, fathers, children, community members, business members, church members, civic organization members, whatever it is that you're called to be. We want you to come back and do that in your own community. And so there's ways that you can go and say yes to those types of trips and go serve with us in Abaco, Bahamas. And so those would be the ones right at the top of my head, that I would say for sure jump on board and take a look at that. I know the dollars where they go, they get stretched a long ways. Our programs create long, because we walk with the family for 7 years. So it's not like we're just a short term thing. It's an inch wide, mile deep. We're going really deep with these families to truly create transformation where then the parents become the champion of the story. Not you or I, not the donor, the parents. Because when the parents become champion of the story, the family changes. Then you have, just like my dad, where there's a shoulder to stand on, where
Mm-hmm.
these parents then can become those places where the kids then can go launch out of. And we need to equip other people to have their shoulders be a little bit broader, and they want to, but like a little bit broader, a little bit wider, a little bit stronger, so they can go out and be the change that they want in their families, and what we see in the world.
Oh, that's amazing, amazing work that you're doing. Phenomenal to see what you've built. And uh, I, yeah, anybody who has any whisper of interest as he was sharing all of those opportunities, please check out the links below and reach out to Tim if there's some way you can help him with his causes. Amazing, amazing what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for the legacy you are leaving behind. I mean, yours is clearly something that is quite ginormous. The impact and the ripple effect of what you're doing is phenomenal. But what I think is so important is what drove it was, just one step at a time and just following your heart and that congruency and making sure that you were going to live a certain way and that the true authentic Tim could please, show up and stand out in all areas of life. And then that led you to do this. And so lots of ways for you to get involved if you have any any pull at all. Please, please, please listen. And definitely check out his book and read that story or listen to the story. It's lovely. So so well done. Thank you for sharing it with us, Tim. Thank you for being here today. And I we will I'm sure we will be staying in touch. Any final word, final thought?
No, I just think this what you're doing as far as like trying to create space in these transitions is so needed, because at the end of the day is there's always going to be transitions that we're going through, and
Mhm.
so ultimately the more guides they have, the more owls they have in their life, like yourself, the better it's going to be. So I just
Thank
thank you
you.
for being able to share a little bit of my story to everybody else, and look forward to whatever it is the next steps that reveal themselves because of our obedience to this. Yes, because there will be one out of this, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And there'll be some that we just never even know about, That's the beautiful thing too, the ripples that we will never even hear. So, thank you everyone, and see you next time.